So that you know what? I'll let you go.
Yeah, so thank you, Doug.
Yes.
So that information, what I can do is if you email me, I have the PDF for it. I can attach it to an email, and then you can just go through the information. Yes, Ms. Clayton. So the question is, what's the difference between Medicare and Medicaid? So Medicare is basically your retirement health insurance, been there for, okay? Medicaid is for people who don't have any money. So basically to qualify for Medicaid depends on the state, but typically as an individual you're allowed to keep roughly $2,000 of assets. You may have a nominal life insurance policy, and therefore you may have a car that you can transport in, but basically you have no financial assets.
So Medicaid, Medicare, let it stand there so long and they drop it. They don't pay nothing.
Correct.
Okay. And the nursing home, they put in money. So only other way, like my friend was telling me, that he won't have to pay no money because once Medicaid kick in, then they're gonna take care of everything else. Is that true?
So the question was, in a nursing home, if you don't have any assets, will Medicaid kick in? The answer is maybe, right? So it depends on looking at all of your assets. So they're going to have to do a look back. So your friend's brother would have to go through, provide them all of his checking account statements. See, checking if he had annuities, if he had pensions, if he had all of those things, right? Because they're going to look at all of the assets they have, and then they're going to say, okay, if he's receiving a pension from AT&T, let's say, speaking them as a company, well, that pension is now going to get redirected to the nursing home. So the nursing home gets paid, right? If you are on Medicaid in Illinois, it used to be that if you were married, and your spouse went in and needed assistance and you met the spend down rules, that your house was exempted. Not anymore. So now if you do the spend down rule and your spouse goes on Medicaid and that for it, your spouse, the house, they now put a lien against to recover assets once you pass with that for, right? So you get to stay in the house, but there becomes a lien on the house. All right, so if you're saying, oh, well, you know, my spouse passes, now I'm going to move in with the kids, and they live in Ohio, just pick a state, right? So I'll just sell my house and do it. Well, if your spouse incurred, let's say, $100,000 worth of expenses, right, and you now say, okay, I can sell the house for $200,000, the state of Illinois will get their $100,000 back. You'll walk away with a check for $100,000 in my example, right? So it depends on the situation. So that's why you start to do planning and that for it. But as Doug was talking about, you want to look at, it's not necessarily a long-term care policy, but a long-term care plan, right? So if your plan is that your children are going to take care of you, then I suggest you have a conversation with your children so they know that, because they may have other plans, right? All right? You're going to say, if something happens to me, mom or dad, you know, you say, well, you're just going to come over and take care of me, and they're like, whoa, hang on, well, wait, you know, I didn't sign up for that, right? Or maybe they can't do it, right? I mean, statistically, the oldest female in the family takes care of the parents, statistically, okay? The challenge with that becomes, if they are taking care of their parents and they are not working and getting paid for it, then that means potentially that they could have less Social Security, right? They could have less saved up for retirement, right? So there are questions and potential concerns with it. So it's not just a long-term care policy or a life insurance or annuity portion that pays for it. It's your plan, right? If your plan is that they're going to take care of you, then I do seriously suggest you have that conversation, because maybe they'll pay for the insurance, right? Because it could be in their best interest to make sure that there's funds available to be able to pay for your coverage, right? So it's not just necessarily the policy, it's the plan and the strategy that goes around it, right? So when you talk about, Doug mentioned about the different types of policies to be able to cover costs on it, Again, each one of those have cost considerations, they have age considerations and underwriting considerations, right? But you want to make sure that you look at that because they could be viable options with which to provide coverage in that point, right? So we're in the first, this is now the new year, right? It's January 3rd today in that for it. So now would be a good time to start to look at, if you haven't for a long period of time, to potentially review your documents, right? So if you don't have a will, or if your will hasn't been updated in a long time, you may just want to look at it.
Can I chime in? Sure. Not just review, but organize and gather, right? In one area. I think that's important, just so you all know where you can go to get everything that might be important to you with regards to your financial lives.
So when you look at that, one of the keys on it is potentially a lot of people have safe deposit boxes. You may have a safe deposit box, right? Okay. Next question becomes, who are the signers on the box? Right? Think of it. If, let's say, you and your spouse are signers on the box, but not your power of attorney or your kids are that for it, who can get into the box if something happens to you? Potentially nobody, because the bank doesn't have to let you in because you're not an owner on the box, right? The IRS is concerned because you could be Otto Kerner and have $1 million of cash in there, and they want to know that they could potentially get some tax money from you, right? So there becomes this concern of what's in there and who can access it. Some banks will allow the named, either the trustee or the person who's the administrator, to be able to go into the box and access just a will and potentially trust papers, but nothing else, because they're not an owner on the box, right? Owners have rights, right? So if they're not an owner on the box, then they can't get into it. Yes?
But what happens if the person that's on the box with the owner passes away?
That's why you need to either have one. You can have one of two things on there. Well, one of three, I guess. You can have a second owner, so you could have, let's say, your son or daughter as another signer on the box, right? But you may not want to leave your $1 million in there because they might access it, right? So you got there for it. The second could be having a power of attorney on the box. The challenge with the power of attorney on the box is that power of attorney ceases when someone passes, all right? So they may not be able to get in if you've already passed. The third could potentially be having your trust be the owner of the box, right? If your trust is the owner of the box, then there is a succession plan for the trust, right? There's me, let's say, as the trustee, and now if something should happen to me, I have a named successor, my son, my daughter, my wife, whoever it would be, right? That person's stepping up, right? So then they could potentially access the box because the trust owns it, not me as an individual for it, right? So it's important to understand titling and ownership. As I've said in the past, titling doesn't matter until it matters, and once it matters, it's too late, right? Doug had mentioned about his father-in-law who had a policy that didn't have a named beneficiary. Millions of dollars go unclaimed each year because people don't know that there's a life insurance policy, right? And the insurance company doesn't know if somebody's passed, right? They can, if you're 130, maybe they can think you did, but people are living longer, so maybe you're still here, right? And there is no requirement for them to search somebody out, right? So it's not like, oh, is Joe still alive? Well, not for Joe keeps making his payments, or he's got a policy that's paid up. Well, until we hear from Joe, we're going to assume that everything is still going, right? So it's important to review those policies, A, for beneficiaries, right? A lot of times we get the policies, we stick them in the safe box or whatever, and then we never look at them again for it. It could be in those policies reviewing those, because there could be situations today where Doug had mentioned about policies have changed, and then it could be a situation if you have cash value, or maybe you can get a policy that has a long-term care provision for it, or maybe the same cost or potentially less, or potentially more insurance depending on your situation and that for it. So it's important to look at those. A lot of people look at life insurance just as an expense. It's an expense, I'm kind of throwing money away in that for it. Excuse me, it could be perceived that way, but it could also potentially have a financial benefit for it, all right? And you just need to understand how that works for it. So since it's the first of the year, you're going to be getting all of your tax information in. It could be an idea to start to look through what you have, right? Understand, if I haven't taken a look at beneficiaries in a while, maybe it's time to take a look at beneficiaries, right? Doug had mentioned about having an IRA, have your trust being the beneficiary of an IRA account. It's more important today potentially for that than maybe it was in the past, and that has to do that the Supreme Court has ruled that beneficiary IRA accounts are judgmentable assets, meaning that if your son or daughter inherits your IRA account, and God forbid, their marriage dissolves or that for it, and it goes to them specifically, their ex-spouse now could potentially get half of that money. If you utilize a conduit IRA account through a trust, potentially that doesn't happen, right? So there are specific reasons and specific ways that you want to have assets titled. Again, titling doesn't matter until it matters. Once it matters, it's too late, right? So it's important to start to look through those things. If you do have your trust or your wills or your powers of attorney, and you would like, I can scan those, put them onto your account. I've done this for other clients so that if something does happen, if it's a power of attorney situation, I can fax or email that power of attorney to the hospital, the nursing home, wherever it would be at that point in time, right? So it's accessible. If you are a power of attorney for health care for someone or have a power of attorney for health care for someone, I usually recommend for the health care portion, whoever it is, you give them a copy of it and you tell them to make a copy and keep it in their glove box. Why? Because if something happens, they're generally not going to be running around the house going, okay, now where is that power of attorney that I need to have when I get to the hospital to be able to get it? They're most likely going to wear my keys in my wallet so I can get in the car and go. And if you go and you get there and you don't have it, now you've got to turn around or get somebody else to bring it. At worst case, if you get to the parking lot, you can run back out to the car and get the documents out of there for it, right? Yes?
Going back to what you were saying about Medicaid or Medicare, they put a lien on your house, say going to nursing home or something like that.
The surviving spouse, or the spouse that's in the house, correct.
Can you if you put in a trust, can you ask them?
They can still put a lien against it because you own it, unless it's an irrevocable trust. So there's different types of trusts. There's revocable trust and there's irrevocable trust. There can be specific reasons why you have either one in that for it, right? Ownership is key. Corporations can own houses, LLCs can own houses, so there are different ways to potentially move some assets around or something therefore, right? So those are more in-depth detailed on a specific situation. But it's important that you take a look at these options in that for, right? Because at some point in time, we're all going to have to deal with them. Whether it's for ourselves or for our loved ones, and therefore we're going to have to deal with it. It's just a matter of what, right? My wife's plan is that I'll take care of it. So it's just, I guess I have the experience she wants for it. So she better be nice to me. So it's important that you take a look at these things. So there was a quick question about reverse mortgages, whether reverse mortgage is applicable. Depends on your situation. Reverse mortgages can be very complex as far as what they do, and depending on what you want the house to do for you, may or may not be an advisable situation, and that for it. Also with regard to veteran benefits, all right? So there is a program for VA, through the VA, for veterans, but it's very similar to Medicaid. You have to do spend down provisions, could be for yourself or potentially for your spouse. One of the keys, I believe, has to do with it. It has to be, you have to have had at least, if I remember right, 3 days within a conflict period. Right? So if it wasn't a conflict, it was peacetime, and therefore, then it may not qualify for it. So there are some specific programs, there are some specific things, and there are specific people that deal with that particular area. But basically, it comes into being kind of a spend down area, very similar to what Medicaid on that is for it. Okay. So, any questions on that? Okay. So just kind of a couple kind of news items area for it. One of them, that there's a mayoral election coming up in Chicago, right? So this is, Daley's like taxes. So here's a tax, one of the tax that Bill Daley has floated again for it. It's the commuter tax, meaning that if you come from the suburbs and take come into the city or that for it, that you're going to pay a tax for it. So if you grab the Metro in Evergreen Park, you would potentially pay a commuter tax from there to get to wherever you're getting to in Chicago and that for it. So it's a host of other taxes that he's wanting for it. The other part of it, I love this one. that this says that mayors want the state to raise gas tax by up to 30 cents a gallon. So outgoing Chicago Mayor Rahm Emanuel says the state's motor fuel tax should be increased to fund highway and bridge improvements. The Democratic colleagues from Metropolitan Mayoral Caucus said Tuesday, this is a couple weeks ago, the 19 cents right now should be increased by as much as 30 cents. Just so it's known, consumers also pay sales tax on gasoline for it, so it would be another tax on, you trying to get it. That would be, he wants it for the state, but that's what Rahm is suggesting, is that basically we increase the tax there for it. So just so you know, that with the new governor coming in and kind of at Chicago, if you haven't gotten a significant increase in your pension or that for it, then you better be looking for other assets, because they're going to be trying to grab as much as they can here for it. And to kind of give you an idea of where Illinois stands as far as from the state with regard to its pension area for it, well, we're not the worst state for the union for it. We're number 3. Okay, so we're the top 3. Right now, it says in this article it was that the state of Illinois, as a general for all the pensions for it, are funded at about 35.6%. The pension shortfall is 141.2 billion. That's the 3rd largest. Government workers as a share of the workforce are 12.4. It's the 7th lowest. And the average annual public retiree receives roughly $35,000. That's the 5th highest. So there's talk about trying to fund the pensions in that for it. I'm not sure how they're going to do that, given how underfunded the pensions are today in that for it. This is just the state. This is not the city of Chicago. All right. So the city of Chicago, if you live in the city and you own property, you get your property tax bill. If you look in the middle of your property tax bill, there's the top part which tells you how much you owe, and then there's kind of a gray section, and there's another part at the bottom. In that gray section there, that tells you about how well funded each one of the pensions that the city has for it. City of Chicago is underfunded by about another, I think it's $68 billion for that for it, right? So, and depending on actuarial accounts, I've seen the number for the state as high as $200 billion. So depends on how the actuaries run the numbers and what they do as projections for growth network. So yes.
What would be the average size of pension for the state of Illinois?
For average annual payout per public retiree in Illinois is roughly $35,000. I'm sorry? Only $35,000, right? I mean, you can't use Social Security. Can't even get $35,000 for it if you reach full retirement age, at least right now for it. So, so it's just kind of interesting that's it for. So, so that's the other part for it. This last article talked a little bit about just the funding ratios for CPS and that for it. So as of June 30th, 2017, the funded ratio decreased from 50% to June 30th, as of June 30th, 2016, to 49.5% as of June 30th, 2017. That's a negative trend line, right? So it says based on market value of assets, and decreased from 52.5% as of June 30th, 2016 to 50.1 as of June 30th, 2017. And there was a there was a net deferred asset loss of roughly $139 million. So, and just so you're aware, and maybe you're not, CPS has the ability to raise property taxes without going through council approval if you're in the city and that for it. So just so you're aware, the Board of Education dedicated property tax levy capped rate of 0.383% was increased to 0.567%. Okay, so that's roughly about a 15% increase there on the percentage basis for it. So, so you're going to see, so again, when you look at this year and you start to look at what your expenses could potentially be, if you're in the city, you know there's going to be an increase just because of what's happening with the CPS pension portion for it. Different mayoral candidates have talked about raising taxes. They always want to raise them. They always try to leave property taxes out because they know that's not a very popular one, but it's the quickest one that they can get to get money from, right? Because you get the biggest hit at once from it. So as you start to look at 2019 and looking to say, well, how do we project going forward on it? those of you who are in Social Security may have received or will potentially receive a Social Security increase this year, and then Medicare will take most of that away, right? So your increase may not be as big of an increase as what you think that you're going to receive. So as these costs continue to potentially increase or inflate, then where are the funds going to come from to be able to cover those particular cost increases, right? So it's just kind of looking at what we have and how the best way we can make those assets perform for you. Yes?
In that last word, assets, if you're losing people from the state off tax, there's no increase in what the state brings in as far as taxes and all of that, because people really have become number 2 in the United States for the most people that moved out of the state. New Jersey is number 1.
Well, we're at least top 3, right? I mean, got to be go top 2. See, so the comment was that the state's continuing to lose population. There was an article that I read probably about 6 months ago or so. In that particular article, between 2010 and 2017, I believe it was, there were roughly 320 million people over that roughly 7-year period of time that left the state of Illinois, right? When I was driving in this morning, I was listening to the radio. Chicago, it says, on the radio they said, I think it was like 100 people a day or so are leaving Chicago itself, right? So, and then the other part of it becomes, as a state, from a demographic standpoint, it's a more, basically people were more retirees in the state. Again, the state at this point in time does not tax retiree benefits and therefore, right? So that means that the rest of the state is picking up those particular costs. Right? So there's a lot of challenges that they have out there. There was an article yesterday I was reading about places to retire with low taxes. So it's like, okay, maybe this is, they were all like islands. It was like, oh, this I could live in this, So it's a matter of starting to look at, again, from where your costs potentially are. If property taxes are going up, which they may, all right, I'm not saying they are, but they could, right? And if they do, then where are those extra dollars going to come from? If your pension didn't go up, or if your Social Security didn't go up to cover those, then that means the monies have to come from somewhere else, right, with which to cover those particular costs and that forth. So just something to kind of keep in mind or think in terms of at that point, right? Okay. Any questions? Okay. Well, again, I wish you all a happy new year in that for you, and we look forward to seeing you next month. Thank you.